Welcome to MuggleCast, your weekly ride into the wizarding world. I'm Andrew.
I'm Eric.
I'm Micah.
I'm Laura.
Choo choo.
And on today's episode, we are going to discuss orphans in literature and the divergent paths Harry and Voldemort took, despite both having no parents. And we are joined by one of our Slug Club members today, Shyam. Hey, Shyam, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Let's get your fandom ID.
For my favorite book, I'd say it's either Goblet of Fire or Half-Blood Prince. Favorite movie, I think it's Prisoner of Azkaban. Hogwarts House is Hufflepuff. Ilvermorny, it took me some time to remember this because you can't even find this on your Wizarding World anymore, or you can't take the test again. But but I think I was Puckwudgie.
I think
I was Puckwudgie. And then for Patronus, I think I was a Tigress. My favorite fan moment, I guess, was probably the midnight release of the Deathly Hallows book. It was the first time I'd been to a midnight release, so that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of costume contests and stuff like that. It's either that or one time I sent a letter to J.K. Rowling before the 7th book came out, and I don't know if it was actually her who replied. It was maybe an intern, but yeah, I asked her all about what's going to happen, some hints about book 7 and stuff like that. So that was cool to get.
And you got a response.
Yeah. Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So did you frame that, I assume?
It's not framed. It's just somewhere in my house, in storage somewhere.
Did she spoil the plot for you?
No. She was like, you just have to wait and see, and something like that. I was asking her, are we going to find out if Snape is good or bad? Just the normal questions everyone was thinking about back then.
No, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, she just wanted to not answer any of that, of course, but it was so cool.
Well, good for you for taking the initiative to write that letter, and then you got a response. So that's very cool. Good for you. By the way, Shyam, how long have you been in the fandom?
For a long time, since I was maybe 7 or 8 is when my parents got me the first 4 books I think were out at the time, and the first one I was waiting for was Order of the Phoenix. So yeah, I've been a fan for a while.
Fun fact, I've had the MuggleCast email forwarding to my personal Gmail for ever, and I found emails from you dating back to 2009 as a listener, MuggleCast listener. Yeah, wow. You were writing in when you were 12 years old.
Jeez.
We should actually respond to those. We should actually go in.
We'll finally respond to them now.
Yeah, I think I was a little disappointed that I never got a response back then. But...
Yeah, probably. I wouldn't blame you. I mean, J.K. Rowling responded to you, but we didn't. What's up with that?
Well, I think I started listening to MuggleCast around 2008. I remember the first one I listened to was the 1-year anniversary of book 7 coming out, and you were talking about how it's already been a year or something like that. So yeah, 11 years or 12 years. Yeah.
Nice. Well, welcome to the show. It's great to have you. And thanks for your longtime support, both listening and on Patreon. We really appreciate it.
Yep.
So let's move to Muggle Mail now. A lot of people wrote in about our fantasy casting episode last week.
Oh yeah. Choo choo.
Chew to the chew.
Here is a great email from Amy. She writes, "Hi all, I would like to add one casting cameo for the HP TV series. At Bill and Fleur's wedding, when Fred and George are telling Harry how much fun Uncle Bilious was at parties, I would love a quick flashback scene of Conan O'Brien downing that bottle of fire whiskey and running out on the dance floor to pull flowers out of his, well, they never actually say. I was also thinking of Rupert Grint as Arthur Weasley and nearly cheered out loud at work when you said the same. Thanks for an awesome podcast. I have to say, when I found it, I felt like I found my people. Yes.
Oh, great. Conan O'Brien in a Harry Potter TV series.
He's Ginger. Isn't he Ginger? How did we miss that, you guys?
Yeah. But he's also American, and I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I see that, but
yeah. Also, hair dye is a thing, so I don't think that we need to discriminate on Weasley family casting based on whether they're natural gingers or not.
Oh, I know. I was joking.
I just think that's a fun requirement that we should make anyway.
I mean, but James and Oliver Phelps, right? They're not.
Exactly.
Oh, they're not ginger. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Conan fits that tall, lanky description very well. So
true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for this.
All right. Our next piece of mail comes from Fiona. Fiona says, listening to the TV casting episode, I'm wondering who you'd want as the female Sorting Hat. I do think the Sorting Hat should be female. The Sorting Hat voice could also do the previously on Harry Potter and or any narrator voice if needed. Also, who would you want to do the theme tune or soundtrack? This is an interesting idea. You know what I love about the idea of a Harry Potter TV show is the opportunity for unknown casting. Like, there are so many of these roles. Of course, we picked out actors that kind of, fit the roles in our heads. But it's entirely possible much of this cast could be made up of unknown actors. And I think the Sorting Hat voice could easily fall into that category too. And I love the idea of a female Sorting Hat.
I would like, if it's not female, I would like Micah to be the voice of the Sorting Hat.
So
He's an unknown. He's got a deep voice. He would make your head rumble when he's speaking.
You can just go choo-choo.
You need an iconic voice. Choo-choo, Hufflepuff for you.
Now, these are good questions. We didn't really think about the Sorting Hat. We probably should have, as well as the theme song. I mean, I think most likely they would keep with Hedwig's theme, but who would be the ones? Kind of like our open. I like that open to a TV show.
Yeah, I don't know who does the score for His Dark Materials, but I really like it. So I think that would be a good starting point.
All right, next email.
Yeah, the next email comes from Jeffrey, who says, "You guys came up with some great casting choices in the last episode. I just had a few quick thoughts to add. I think Eva Green or Margot Robbie would be the perfect Bellatrix Lestrange. Both actresses have range and a penchant for playing a whole lot of pretty and a whole lot of crazy. Second point, someone said something about Jennifer Lawrence playing Molly Weasley. Hope that was a joke, which made me think of Jennifer Saunders. She's got a similar look to Julie Walters, and she's got a nice, easy, comfy tone to her voice. I did take a look at Jennifer Saunders. I agree. She does look a lot like Julie Walters. And then finally, if Rebel Wilson absolutely has to be attached to this project, wow, we're getting slammed across the board.
Man.
I think she'd be a good candidate for the Welcome Witch at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. She's got the right kind of sarcastic edge to her character.
Well, just to be clear, only Micah and Eric's choices are getting slammed. Mine and Laura's choices are appreciated.
Yeah, actually, Jennifer Saunders, I had not thought of her, but I think she would be perfect. I don't know if y'all have ever seen anything she was in. I grew up watching Absolutely Fabulous, which is a Britcom that she was in. So on top of, having a good amount of range, she's also very funny. And it would be interesting to see how they could expand on her character's interactions with Fred and George.
I like this Margot Robbie suggestion, too, for Bellatrix.
Going back to the Sorting Hat casting real quick, I had to find the actress's name, but I was watching her on Broadchurch recently. Marianne Jean-Baptiste. She's got a really great voice.
Oh, she's good in that show.
Yeah, she's English. She's real good in the show. I would love her to be the Sorting Hat.
For Jennifer Saunders, this might date me, but the only thing I remember her in is Shrek 2.
If it dates you, if saying that dates you, it probably dates us all because
it dates you in a good way, Shyam. I think you're younger than all of us.
Yeah.
Okay, next email is from Abby. I was listening to your episode and you cast David Beckham as Ludo Bagman. Greg Davies seems like the perfect fit for me in looks and personality. He is hilarious and has a jovial demeanor that Ludo obviously does as well. He has the belly that Ludo has, and his face is how I picture Ludo's. He also has a carelessness and childlike ignorance that is key to Ludo's character. Also, Adam Driver just seems like he was born to play Snape.
Yeah, we got a lot of emails about Adam Driver playing Snape.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Fan
I can't
favorite.
believe we missed that.
Greg Davies is amazing, an amazing casting choice from Abby. I know him as the host of Taskmaster, a great British TV series, kind of game show type thing. I like that. That's a very inspired kind of thing.
And Shyam, sorry, I should have given you a heads up, but do you want to read this last email?
Yeah, sure. This one comes from Amy. Love the idea of a Harry Potter TV show, but I think it should be on a free network such as ABC, NBC, CBS, etc., since I only have antenna and don't have cable. It could even be on like Amazon streaming since you can watch it on a Fire Stick. I don't make enough money to pay for the TV show to be on a station such as HBO, like y'all have been talking about. Plus, I think Kate Winslet could play Rowena Ravenclaw.
That is a good choice.
Mhm.
Yeah, the thing about this inevitable series is we feel like it's going to be on a streaming platform because that's where all the competition is right now. That's where all the big projects are.
Mm-hmm.
That said, a lot of these shows actually do end up on DVD or Blu-ray, so maybe that could be a solution for you, Amy. I know Netflix has released a bunch of their shows on physical disc over the years to reach those people who don't have streaming, because there are plenty of people just like you who don't. So
I have somebody I've been mulling over that I would really like cast in this show, but he has such a variety of range in his filmography that I'm like not sure where to place him. So I want to ask our listeners, what role do you think Joe Morton would be good for? You would recognize him as Olivia Pope's dad from Scandal.
Also Miles Dyson from Terminator 2.
Right. He's so good. And I feel like he needs to be in the show. So help me figure out where we cast him.
Olivia. That's my impression of him on Scandal.
That was pretty bad, but
What?
okay.
Fine. Okay.
How about Dumbledore?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
Harry.
Absolutely awesome.
Harry.
Ready to put your name in the Goblet of Fire.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Old age.
He said calmly.
It's time to hear from this week's sponsor, BeachBody On Demand. So, look, at least here in the United States, coronavirus is going nowhere, and you're going to be continuing to spend extra time at home and social distancing and extra avoiding germs until next year. Be good to your body and mental well-being during all of this by checking out BeachBody On Demand. They are the easy-to-use streaming service that gives you instant access to over 1,300 super effective workouts, and they're suited for anybody at any time. The secret to getting results is getting started. Once you try BeachBody On Demand, you're going to notice you're feeling better. You're going to be like, wow, I actually feel alive, and I feel like I did something good for myself, because your blood is pumping. You're going to be feeling good. BeachBody On Demand lets you achieve your goals from the comfort and safety of home, and it is much cheaper than a gym membership. They've got so many great workout programs, but I've been really enjoying this new workout lately called Muscle Burns Fat, which focuses on strength training. Workouts are as short as 10 minutes, and they don't require extra equipment, so they're easy to fit into your day. There are programs that can work for any experience level, whether you're just getting started or you've been working out for a while. I really want you to try BeachBody On Demand because I know firsthand these workouts work well, and this is the solution to avoiding a germy gym. Just start with smaller workouts if you don't already have a fitness routine, and I promise you, you're going to be feeling better right after your first workout. It's the post-workout high, not the bodybuilding. That's why I've been addicted to working out since high school, and I'm sure many people will attest I am no bodybuilder. Right now, our listeners can get a special free trial membership when you text MuggleCast to 303030. That's so easy to do, so do it right now. You will get full access to this entire platform for free, all the workouts, the nutrition information, and support absolutely free. Again, just text MuggleCast to 303030. Okay, it's time for our discussion.
Yes. Super, super, super exciting. So we were discussing Neville and Harry a couple episodes ago. When Laura was talking, I was like, there is another connection that we could explore further. And it's that both Neville and Harry are orphans, but also there's orphans in literature. It's super, super, super popular to have a hero or a main character who has been orphaned. So I was like, we got to build a discussion about that. But pretty much through fairy tales, literature, you get Cinderella, Oliver Twist. Orphans just show up really, really commonly. And also in superhero origin stories, Batman's an orphan, Superman is an orphan. He's raised by foster parents on Earth. Peter Parker, James Bond, Captain America. So, there's so many orphans. I had trying to wrap my brain around why is it that there are so many orphans across literature, and what exactly is appealing about the orphan origin story that the author is like, yes, I need to do this. And then Andrew, you found kind of an article that touches on this.
Yeah, it answers that question exactly. At least the author of this article tries to. She shares a few different reasons why authors might make their lead character an orphan. For example, out of convenience. How can a child realistically put themselves in danger with their parents waiting for them at home? So they just take the parents out of the picture, and then there's no problem. Another reason is to develop the characters, because killing their parents is a pretty good example of a traumatic experience. Orphans are also used as a plot device, because without it, the plot would be completely altered, as is the case with Harry Potter. They're also done for mystery and suspense. The author of this article writes, our protagonists usually don't know much about their parents, and this opens up a world of secrets waiting to be written. And then finally, because family. Orphans emphasize the meaning of family. The author says, children's novels are filled with messages of love and forming relationships. Orphans are often alone at the beginning of their story and slowly find a home among others. And that's definitely in the case of Harry Potter.
I was going to say, yeah, which reason or reasons do we think appealed to Jo? Like when she set out to write a mystery, she's like, oh, Harry won't know who he is, and that's because he won't have his parents to tell him.
Let's not also forget J.K. Rowling's work within this space to begin with, right? She creates this charity called Lumos, which is all about, serving this particular community of children. And I think that there was an appeal right away because something within her, drew her to this idea of a young boy who didn't know that he had these powers within him. And then yet, he's also an orphan. The other piece I would just add is I think, and this may not be the right word to use, but I think there's a sympathetic piece to it, right? As a reader, we are automatically drawn into the fact that this character is isolated in a way, and they're somehow, kind of fighting back against the world. And I think there's something that immediately will pull us in as a reader because of that.
I agree with that. As I was thinking about sort of the why behind this, at least, why do orphan narratives appeal to so many of us? And I think it's because even though we may not be orphans ourselves, we have at some point in our lives felt isolated and alone. So we can relate to a limited extent to how that feels. And, using a book like Harry Potter as a vessel, it can empower us to feel like we're fighting back,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thinking about this topic really made me think, well, what did my parents give me, growing up with my parents? What do you get from parents that perhaps somebody with no parents would miss? And I'm like, well, parents gave me a sense of identity. It's like, who am I? I am their child. Definitely a morality. There's sort of, this is right and this is wrong. These are the things that you sort of learn. And anybody can, I think, be a parent to a foster child, like surrogate parents, foster parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, whoever's raising the kid can all provide this as well. But with an orphan, especially if you're writing the story, you can have a lot of those questions be answered that way. You can have a character with a shaky morality because they just haven't been taught. So I wanted to ask, what are some other orphans that we know of in literature that we also regularly consume? And you guys came up with a pretty good list.
I think we were talking about this game just before recording. Link in The Legend of Zelda. I wasn't sure, and then I had to Google it to be sure. But yeah, he has always been an orphan, I think, in the large majority of video games. And thinking about this list that I just read off, I think part of it is out of convenience because if he doesn't have his parents in the way, he can go out all over Hyrule and do whatever he wants without any parents saying, "Hey, come home. Don't defeat Gandalf."
Right, but you also with Link have that one overarching question that I feel like has never been answered, which is, does he really have family out there? What is Zelda to him? Is she a sister?
Zelda's family.
Is she, I don't know, at the end of Breath of the Wild, it got a little hot and heavy. I'm just going to say, like, didn't know what was going to happen between those two in that cutscene.
Oh, do you think there's like a Luke Skywalker Princess for Leia relationship?
Yeah, you never know too. That's the other thing where the themes are borrowed from, right? Maybe one of the main developers on Zelda is a huge Star Wars fan.
Which that's another huge orphan story, by the way. Luke and Leia both, raised without knowing their parents, like their real lineage there.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about Anna and Elsa in the Frozen movies. That's a huge plot point in both of the movies. Their parents died in a shipwreck, I think, and that basically forms reason for their detachment or Anna and Elsa's separation in the first movie, at least.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because I wanted to complain about that for a second. Disney relies on the dead parent trope so heavily all the time. You think about The Lion King, you think about Finding Nemo, Bambi, I mean...
Tarzan, too.
Tarzan, Dumbo.
The Jungle Book.
Yeah.
Jungle Book. Dead parents everywhere. It's a little out of control. They gotta come up with other ideas.
I feel like that, Moana is a good example of someone whose parents are still very much living.
But doesn't her grandmother die in that movie?
Yeah.
Or grandfather?
Yeah.
Grandmother, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a little more in line with like the natural
fair
progression of life, though.
Yeah. Death, any story about life should probably at some point have space reserved to talk about death because it's part of the cycle. Like these stories, to the point where they exist to teach us about ourselves and our environment. And J.K. Rowling has really said death permeates her books as a theme. So if we look at that, then it makes sense that our hero Harry was introduced to it at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of an interesting thing. And then Laura, you had a really good.
Yeah. So I based this off my most recent interaction with a piece of media that really impacted me. And that's Ellie from Last of Us 1 and 2. Ellie's orphaned at a young age when her mother dies during, effectively a zombie apocalypse. And she's carrying a very big secret that you don't find out about super early on, and that really determines her character trajectory for the rest of the series. And it's just, these are beautifully done games and you should play them. After I finished Last of Us 2, I was in my feelings for like a week. So
Nice.
Yeah, and if Ellie had her parent or if her mom, showed up out of the blue, she might be able to help her with what she's going through emotionally.
Yeah. Or what happened to her that made her the main character of this series might have never happened.
Yeah. A couple that came to mind for me just thinking about it now and tying it to Song of Ice and Fire. You have Daenerys Targaryen, who is orphaned. You also have Jon Snow, who, once you learn the truth about him, he is an orphan as well. So, you have really the two main characters of that entire series who are orphans. And again, it's always interesting to see, why is it that the writer, the author, takes this path?
Well, I think to an extent we can argue that everyone in Game of Thrones at some point becomes an orphan.
Like all the Stark children too.
Oh man.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point, Laura.
Womp womp.
Yeah.
I was also going to mention one more is in the movie Shazam. Billy Batson is also an orphan. At least in the comics, he's more of an orphan. In the movie, his mom ends up just abandoning him and not wanting him anymore because she thinks the foster system can take care of him better. So,
oh gosh, I remember a movie I watched as a kid that had orphans was Angels in the Outfield with Joseph Gordon-Levitt,
yeah,
and Danny Glover, and that's all about sort of definitely thematically related to what we're going to talk about later. But switching gears real quickly, what does being an orphan give Harry? And you say, when I think of like, especially young Harry, I think of like isolation and almost like a sort of comfort from the isolation. So, like Harry, Harry has his friends with the spiders in the cupboard, but he really learns to keep to himself. Like, I don't know, he develops a sort of okayness with being on his own. I think most of the time, I think he's lonely, but there's like a, what's the word? Like an independence about him.
Mm-hmm. I think, from years and years of being tormented by Dudley, he's also given, a bit of a hard outer shell. So when it comes to his early interactions with Draco Malfoy, he's not particularly shaken by them. His approach is just to sort of disengage. Like, okay, I'm just going to avoid that one.
Right.
I think it also gives him a reason to get out there, go into the wizarding world and search for answers. If he knew about his parents, I think he would have been less propelled to kind of go on this journey. With each book, there are more reasons for him to continue searching for answers about his parents and his family history.
That's a good point. I think that aligns with, too, the whole discovery of the wizarding world is really also a search backwards to who his parents were, because his parents were these great renowned witch and wizard.
Right. And to an extent, who he is too, because his identity was stolen from him by the Dursleys. He doesn't get that back until Hagrid first, kicks down that door. And so he's, just as much as he's learning about who his parents were and the truth behind what happened to them, he's learning that for himself too.
And it gives him reason to defeat Voldemort because he wants to avenge his parents.
Yeah. I would say it gives him a sense of independence too. And that independence shows up throughout the series, but particularly in the earlier years, there's a sense of recklessness. And I think because now he's been given this freedom that he didn't have previously, he's just willing to go out there and try and do anything without being as guarded maybe as somebody who was raised by, let's say, Molly and Arthur Weasley.
I like that you bring up the adventurousness, because like Harry takes great pride when somebody tells him he looks like James, or like he can ride a broom and James was like great at Quidditch. Like Harry really swells with pride, not only for identifying like he's similar to his dad, which who wouldn't like to hear that, but also he's good on a broom because his dad was good on a broom. There's like a genetic component there that's like really interesting too.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it really is like looking in a mirror, right? Like we see at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry, for a short period of time, believes that he saw his dad casting the Patronus charm to cast away the Dementors.
Yeah. And I remember in particular the owl's memory sequence when Harry is actually straight up looking at his dad from like 8 inches away. And he says, he notes, the similarities. So how would the story be different if he wasn't an orphan? If Lily and James had raised Harry, what are all the differences, do we think, that we would see in his character?
He might be more spoiled.
Do we think so? Do we?
Well, his parents did have a lot of money, but I mean, they wouldn't spoil him in the way that the Dursleys spoiled their son. Yeah.
Sirius would, though. It's like he was sending him gifts when he was
I can see that.
couple months old.
Yeah, Sirius would be the first guy to give Harry like a cigarette.
That's true.
Didn't we all have that like auntie or uncle figure who did that for us?
I wish.
I feel like that's healthy to a certain extent. I mean, if people are overstepping their bounds, and I think I would argue Sirius does throughout the short period of time we see him in the books, he's not always the best influence for Harry. So it would be interesting
but he wouldn't have gone to jail and
like.
spent his formative years behind bars in Azkaban. He would have been able to.
It would have been different.
Yeah, exactly. To layer onto your question, though, Eric, I'm kind of curious how Harry would have interacted with Ron and Hermione initially if he hadn't grown up an orphan. we very much look at the Weasleys as being his surrogate family. Molly's really the mother that he never had. Ron, Fred, and George are his brothers. And we look at the Burrow really as being home for Harry. I don't know that they would appeal to him in the same way, nor would they appeal to the reader in the same way.
Well, right, because Ron and Hermione were outcasts in their own way, and Harry was too. And if Harry was not an outcast, if he didn't lose his parents, if he wasn't the chosen one, how would he relate to Ron and Hermione?
Really kind of interesting. And I think Lily and James would have socialized Harry with other wizards. Maybe not all purebloods. I think there'd be like some half-blood families, but if they're living in Godric's Hollow, which is purported to be this huge wizarding community, Harry would definitely already have friends by age 11. So, yeah, okay.
I think Harry, by virtue of being an orphan, chooses to be an outcast, because we see walking into the wizarding world, he's walking in with all of this star power that he didn't know he had. It's very much like Dumbledore says throughout the books, like it's our choices that define who we are. And we see early on in the series, Harry could have gone down a path of celebrity, right? Like Draco Malfoy extends that invitation to him to sort of be part of that like cultish, like snot-nosed, wizarding society. And he chooses not to. And I think that's because this is all new to him, and he feels like an outcast just stepping into this space that he has no historical knowledge of, and he doesn't know anything about his family. I don't think that means Harry wouldn't have socialized with Ron and Hermione had this horrible fate not befallen him, but I don't know that circumstances would have like aligned the stars to allow it to happen in the way that it did.
Right.
On the train when Harry first meets Ron, I feel like that whole scenario would have gone completely different, because he would have already had like pure blood friends, or not necessarily pure blood, but other prominent families. So he would already be sitting with them, and they probably would never have even had that connection early on.
Or who knows? Harry's parents knew the Weasleys.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So who knows? Maybe they would have been close.
Did they? I forget that. I always forget that.
Yeah, I could not see Lily and James only having friends based on, blood status.
Let's also be real here. There would be no story without them dying. So I mean,
no, it would be a happy school-age tale of Harry running around Hogwarts in the invisibility cloak.
Who's the antagonist? Draco? Lockhart?
Maybe? I don't know. Yeah, the book series does open with Harry becoming an orphan. But actually, so Micah blew my mind. I was coming up with this topic, and Micah was like, well, if we're talking about orphans, you should talk about Voldemort. And I did a double take, and I was like, holy crap, Voldemort is also an orphan in Harry. But I don't know why it didn't occur to me. But of course, we see the orphanage. We see Voldemort's parents or would be, and how that all comes together. Let's talk about Voldemort a little bit here, because so they're both orphans, but they're and one is the hero and one is the villain of this story. So how is that for like storytelling right there?
It's also worth noting too, though, that Voldemort, or Tom Riddle at the time, right, had a hand in ensuring that he was going to remain an orphan, in that he kills his father. But at the time, yes, his mom dies in childbirth, and he's sent to the orphanage, and it is really interesting to see how he grows and develops versus somebody like Harry. And because Voldemort or Tom Riddle could have turned out just the same as Harry, or Harry could have turned out just the same as Tom. Because let's face it, Harry isn't treated great at all.
Right.
So is it something, I think this is kind of getting to a question Laura has in here, which is it something inherent in the person that you just can't control or change, that's there from birth?
Well, and another factor, as a chicken soup will remind us later, Voldemort was born out of a love potion. So his existence was forced. It wasn't made out of love, whereas James and Lily, they loved each other when they conceived Harry, presumably. So I think that's a key difference. And also a key difference is their upbringings. Even though Harry was brought up in the Dursleys' home, it was still worlds better than what Tom Riddle was going through.
Yeah, we're meant to believe that is the case. I always question, but J.K. Rowling did say, and I think you could find it on Accio Quote too, but she actually admits that as a result of being conceived under the love potion, Voldemort is completely blind to some of those finer parts of humanity, like love. And that seems to really excuse the whole, a lot of his behavior, a lot of what his choices are throughout the book series. And yet the books do consciously compare Harry to Tom Riddle quite a lot. And if you really think about it, like, what do they have in common? What does young Tom Riddle have with school-aged Harry? And I think they really are both, again, going back to being independent, going back to being able to handle tasks and sort of follow your own personal ambitions. I mean, Harry has Ron and Hermione, but he still goes off on his own quite a lot. And he's definitely sort of always, he keeps his own counsel, I guess you could say. But so does Tom Riddle.
Yeah. I have a question for the panel. Before Dumbledore shows up and invites Tom Riddle to Hogwarts, is there ever a point in his young life where somebody has given him a chance before this? Like, I think about, this nature versus nurture debate, and I'm totally willing to accept that in the magical world, if, conception is forced through a love potion, that would lay the groundwork for things in this person's life not to work out terribly well. But it seems like from the moment baby Tom Riddle was accepted at the orphanage, they were always kind of freaked out by him. And I feel like that creates this like negative feedback loop of like they've already communicated their expectations for him. And so it's just this self-fulfilling prophecy time and time again. So maybe if somebody had given him a chance and like tried to nurture him when he was much younger, it wouldn't have turned out as bad. I'm not saying he still wouldn't have been a sociopath, but like maybe he would have been more of like a functioning one.
Right. Because he would have been thinking, somebody believes in me. Somebody wants to see me grow.
And like at least Harry, he had that in Arabella Figg, right? Like he used to hang out with her when the Dursleys would go on trips. And even though her food wasn't particularly good, he never seemed to mind her company because she was always kind to him.
Yeah. That's definitely pretty interesting. And I don't think, when we talk about how Tom Riddle went bad and why he went bad, which is something that really excites me based on today's discussion, I also think of like, I don't think the orphanage was especially neglectful to him. I just think the whole, like, I don't blame people like Mrs. Cole for, or is it Ms. Cole? Mrs. Cole for, not attending to or like keeping a distance, because I think the way he gained that reputation initially was based on his behaviors. But I just think the whole orphanage thing is that there were so many other kids to look after that he just was never given the individualized attention. Like, I don't actually blame the orphanage for being like actively complicit in, like, fundamentally. I think that it was just because there's so many kids, like by design, you can't give that kind of special attention that Harry gets with people.
Yeah, I agree. I just think back to what Mrs. Cole says about, like, even when he got here and he was a baby, he never cried. And in my head, that got me thinking, like, oh, were they like freaked out by him from the moment he arrived? And even as a kid, I mean, I'm sure we all have memories. Kids are super perceptive and they know when people don't like them.
I think that's probably what it was, that if people actually decided to take an interest in baby Tom Riddle and like nurture him a little bit, because I feel like I don't know if I remember this right, but I think a lot of the kids just ended up bullying him. So if one person ended up taking an interest in him, it might have ended up differently for him.
So I asked my friends who have a podcast, a popcorn psychology podcast. They're psychologists. So I was like, hey guys, is there something going on with orphans? Not in general, like, I just said, is there an emotional, I began to seek kind of just from a mental health standpoint, is there a reason that babies don't cry? Because I was thinking about that quote about Voldemort not crying. And they suggested I look up something called reactive attachment disorder. And this is by no means a wide sweeping diagnosis for children or orphans. I want to be very clear about that. But looking up what this disorder is actually really inspired me and may answer some of these questions about Voldemort at a young age. So basically, like we were saying about Voldemort maybe not having individualized attention given to him, specifically in the first year of life, there's this bond that traditionally forms between infants and their parents. Whenever a baby cries, the child learns that they can rely on their parent for nourishment, for change of diaper, for all of this stuff. And if they are neglected or if they don't receive this, then their entire sort of ability to trust or the relationship between, well, they just call it attachments. The attachments don't happen. And so it's a pretty interesting phenomenon to look at Tom Riddle under the lens of.
Is this just a movieism, or when Dumbledore goes to the orphanage, he gets Tom to go to Hogwarts? I mean, there's somebody who believes in him.
Yeah.
Was it just too late?
Well, and that's a great question. So according to DSM-5, which is the book on mental health, here's reactive attachment disorder. Those who suffer from it experience or establish a consistent pattern of inhibited, emotionally withdrawn behavior toward adult caregivers, manifested by both of the following. The child rarely minimally seeks comfort when distressed, and the child rarely or minimally responds to comfort when distressed. So here you've got this relationship between young Tom Riddle not really caring about the adults in the orphanage. And in fact, doesn't he tell Dumbledore, they think I'm crazy, or they think I'm like, I did it. He's like very averse to the local adults.
Mm-hmm.
And also, here is what people with this disorder display: persistent social or emotional disturbance characterized by at least two of the following: minimal social and emotional responsiveness to others, limited positive affect, and episodes of unexplained irritability, sadness, or fearfulness that are evident during non-threatening interactions. So kind of cagey, kind of seeming cagey. And, it just kind of really hits home for me that perhaps, something like this is what J.K. Rowling was getting at with this character. Like, here's a guy who he never responded well to adults if they cared for him. We don't know, but he was always just withdrawn, and he ended up just not caring much about attachments. Like Dumbledore says, the adult grown Voldemort doesn't really have a friend. He has followers, but no friends.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Andrew, like by the time Dumbledore came, was it too late? I'm not a social worker. I don't have a background in social work, but I know a couple of social workers, and through having discussions with them, there really is a critical period in the young development of children that can make it really difficult to come back from neglect and abuse. And definitely by the time someone's 11 years old, if they haven't been nurtured at all, it would be very difficult to bounce back from that.
I know I mentioned Lumos earlier, but I do think it is important to just note the fact that there's probably a message that J.K. Rowling is trying to send, just given all the work that she has done fighting for kids in orphanages around the world to be reunited with families, that you look at Voldemort, who was raised in an orphanage, and you see what he becomes. And that's not to say that everybody raised in an orphanage becomes Voldemort. I just think that there's subtext there from J.K. Rowling, especially when you compare that to Harry, where even though Harry is treated terribly by the Dursleys, he's still in a home. He still has family. And you mentioned Fig too. that he goes to on occasion. He's still getting out into the world. He's going to school, as bad as that might be for him. It's just different situations. But I do think that J.K. Rowling is trying to send a message there.
Yeah, and Dumbledore notes this too when he's talking to Harry about when he first arrived at Hogwarts. He says something, and I'm just paraphrasing, but he's like, you didn't arrive as happy as I would have hoped, but, you know, you were healthy. And so, you know, at least kind of to Eric's point about reactive attachment disorder, you know, there was a minimal level of care that was being given to Harry at the Dursleys. We can definitely say that it was not adequate in terms of nurturing Harry's, you know, emotional growth. But still, like, there was somebody around to change his diapers. There was somebody around who provided sustenance, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's two more, just wrapping up on the disorder part. Here's two more quotes that I'd like to include. So children with this disorder often resort to negative behaviors like manipulation, isolation, aggression, lying, stealing, and harming themselves or others. These are all things that Tom Riddle and the orphanage is displayed to be doing. And we know that Tom Riddle's gift at manipulation follows him throughout his whole years at Hogwarts. And then honestly, here's a little hope, light at the end of the tunnel. With treatment for RAD, children with reactive attachment disorder may develop more stable and healthy relationships with caregivers and others. You know, there's some counseling involved, and it can be sort of resolved. So if Voldemort had been given, or if young Tom Riddle had been given more of a chance, or if something like this, if something like behavioral health had been known in the 50s, you know, I think there may have still been hope for him, despite the whole love potion conception kind of thing. What blew my mind about it also, just in closing, is that the disorder is really developed in the first year of life. So the whole, you know, changing diapers and forming eye contact with your parent happens in the first year of life. For the first year of life, Harry had his parents. Harry actually was one, you know, when his parents died, 1 and 2 or 3 months. So he actually got the Lily and James, I'm assuming, unfettered, complete love experience, whereas Voldemort from day one was in the orphanage.
Yeah.
And so I think that alone separates them. They're both orphans, but there's a year difference between them. And I think that may psychologically explain why they both turned out the way they did.
Harry got what he needed before he tragically lost his parents, whereas Voldemort didn't.
So to end this discussion, I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through just various other, I know we already said some orphans, but what could, like, let's go through other pop culture orphans, because we've barely scraped the surface. Like, why did their creators choose to make them orphans? And, you know, what does it give them? So the first one I think of is Batman. Like, he is always alone, brooding in his cave, because his parents are dead and he's on a revengeance kick. But also his parents, who would normally tell him right from wrong, the whole morality thing I was talking about earlier, he's able to become a caped and masked vigilante, partly because there's no parents to be like, no, you shouldn't do that. So
right, and because they're loaded and he's inherited their fortune, so he's like, cool, I'm gonna go like in this cave and tool up a bunch of really cool technology so I can take these villains out.
Yeah. So it's kind of neat that to have Batman be similar to Harry Potter.
It's kind of become a running joke at this point. You mentioned him being brooding, and, you know, Batman's very dark, at least in the recent versions of him. And I think people have come to really like that about Batman. That's his thing. He's emo. Yeah. And it's in part because he lost his parents.
I mean, that's, I think, pretty justified.
Right. It's definitely a motivating factor for him. One of the things that just kind of came to mind in looking through a lot of them is that, you know, it also removes a vulnerability, because let's say Bruce Wayne becomes Batman anyway, their parents then become targets, right? And that can be true, you know, with Harry, obviously Ron, Hermione, everybody he cares about becomes targets. But in that initial moment, there, it's not like you can go that route. I just feel like, it becomes something that whoever or whatever these people are fighting against could use as an advantage if they were able to capture or.
That's like
Micah,
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just made me remember rather that Hermione kind of orphans herself
Yeah.
in book 7 for this exact reason.
That's such a teenager thing to do. I don't need my parents.
She unorphans herself later.
Yeah, we're told. It's also the Peter Parker Spider-Man kind of orphaning. Like anybody will be used against me kind of. He's not wrong.
What's interesting there, though, it's that it's his uncle's death that motivates him to become Spider-Man, right? Ultimately.
Well, yeah, he already lost his mom and pop, and it's his uncle's death. It's like, this is one too many. I'm done. I'm becoming a superhero now.
It's kind of like Luke.
Yeah, definitely. His Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen's death really allows him to go off and frees him from the confines of their moisture farm. Another superhero here, Superman. And Superman's a guy who, like, I think a great opportunity is he's kind of a blank slate. Like he's this alien with this immense backstory. It's going to give him super strength and all this culture and all this origin. But as a kid, as a baby, he's raised on Earth by Americans to really sell the whole American dream of an alien, literally, but also from elsewhere, can become an American and uphold American values better than all the rest. That the story of America is an immigrant story, and if and then the connection back to just being an orphan, not knowing who you are, but finding your purpose in specifically a country. There's such a lot of political leaning about the early like Superman because it's truth, justice, and the American way.
One thing I want to add about Superman is there was a radio serial that got adapted into a comic recently about when the KKK was really prominent in like the 40s. They would see Superman as like their idol, and they DC made this comic that was about Superman protecting Chinese American immigrants from the KKK.
Yes.
I really love that story, and it really showed me that Superman is for like the downtrodden and the oppressed and the people who are like minorities.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you, because you said this earlier, but Anna and Elsa from Frozen.
I feel like a lot of the plots of the first two movies, the struggles that they go through are because they're orphans, because Anna and Elsa were really close when they were kids, and they would play around a lot. And ever since their parents died, that made a wall between them, and they had to go off on their own way, and they had their personalities diverged. So I feel like that their being an orphan kind of really was a big factor on that story.
With Elsa, it's interesting because Elsa isolated, like they both lost their parents, but rather than grow closer, it pushes them apart. I always find that so interesting. Like Elsa is kind of a jerk to Anna in those intervening years. Like they're both going through the same trauma, but Elsa internalizes it and blames herself, whereas Anna is just kind of like able to be a little bit more free by saying it's just a thing that happens.
I think another reason for that might be that Elsa had powers and Anna didn't, so she also had to deal with that, and Anna could never understand what that was like.
Conceal, don't feel. Don't let it show.
Just let it go. And I haven't even seen the movies.
Oh, Micah.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that was a direct quote from one of the songs. So.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, because that hasn't been, mainstream media for the last however many years.
Oh, sure. It's just so interesting talking about all these different orphans because they're not the same. And I think like part of it too, like especially with Superman, what you're saying about representing the downtrodden, if they don't have parents, like they become family to humanity. They become family to the whole community, because who are all of us but members of a community? And I think orphans are freer than most from branching out from their immediate lineage to embrace and care for and help and support the human community at large. Maybe that's why so many superheroes are orphans. There's also James Bond. Now, in the books, I'm sure it's a little bit different, and for different reasons. I haven't read the books, but here's a guy who he was orphaned. The British government kind of adopted him and then trained him to be a super killer, super spy. Again, there's sort of a disconnect between morality and also he's been taught that it's for the British government, that there's sort of a grooming process involved in doing his sort of patriotic duty. But he's been given the skills to complete his assignments. And I don't know. It's just, I thought that was worth mentioning because he's a little bit different than all the other orphans we've been talking about.
Yeah, it is interesting to me looking at characters like James Bond and Superman, where, authors over the various years have really made an effort to show like how quintessentially like British versus how quintessentially American they are. It says a lot about sort of like maybe a nationalist perspective when it comes to what these heroes are meant to represent.
Yeah,
definitely.
I agree completely.
And I doubt that James Bond was nurtured by the government when they raised him.
Look,
they did not change his diapers.
I don't know.
They didn't hug him.
Q or M. I don't know. Like, I always look at Q always reminds me of
Alfred.
Alfred.
Yeah, Batman had Alfred. That's fair.
And I know we've talked a lot about Luke Skywalker, but one thing that came to mind when we were talking about that story is that Luke eventually finds out that he does have family out there, right? He finds out he has a sister. He finds out that he has a father that's still alive. Harry was put in such a interesting position because you would have expected at some point in his journey, he would have found out that somebody out there, aside from Petunia, was there. Somebody in his family. And I guess maybe that's too cliche and J.K. Rowling didn't want to go that route, but I just find it odd, right? J.K. Rowling has said his grandparents died on both sides, so that's why they're not around. But I don't know. It leaves you wanting maybe a little bit more. I mean, the only person he's related to is through the Peverils, right? He's probably related to Voldemort in some way, shape, or form.
Distant. So yeah.
It's just weird that he doesn't find any other family member out there.
I agree it's weird. But like with everything Star Wars tends to do with you must be a Skywalker to have super ultimate powers, or you must be related to somebody else who had super powers. I get why J.K. Rowling didn't want to and quickly had to walk back the whole Mark Evans thing as being like, no, he's not related. Because a cousin of Harry would probably be, popular by association.
But I think that also it speaks to the orphans' ability to create their own family outside of blood. And we see Harry do that with Ron, Hermione, and others.
100%.
We do get a listener email from Doug on Jane Eyre. He said, I don't want to be so brazen as to think the only one to reach this conclusion, but since I have never heard J.K. Rowling specifically address this connection, I had to make sure it got brought to your attention, just in case it's not brought up by every other one of your devoted followers. There's only one definitive orphan comparison for Harry, and it is Jane Eyre. Nice coincidence you were just having fun with gender changes in your casting for the Harry Potter TV series. Again, this may be so obvious, everyone knows it, but I'm convinced Jane Eyre had to be one of J.K. Rowling's favorite books growing up, as Jane's early years and Harry's are strikingly similar. Both are orphaned and taken to live with their uncle's family. Both are treated terribly by those families, especially in comparison to how their cousin or cousins are treated, before both are shipped to strange boarding schools. Finally, Jane becomes a governess and Harry becomes an Auror. Okay, that's where the similarities end, but you get the picture. Love how creative you guys are getting with recent shows.
Interesting.
Yeah. I love this. It's very much like what we were talking about a couple episodes ago about sort of recycled cultural narratives. I think it's totally possible that Jane Eyre, provided some kind of influence for Harry Potter.
One other orphan that came to mind is a lot of Charles Dickens novels had to do with being an orphan, and I haven't read any of his books actually, but I have seen the recent David Copperfield movie. And David Copperfield was an orphan, and he had to go through horrible working conditions in factories and shipped off from family to family. And also, there was about 20 years or so ago, Daniel Radcliffe played David Copperfield. And I think that was his first role.
He did,
yeah.
Where he got discovered.
And Maggie Smith was in there too. I think that's how he got discovered. So I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, amazing.
Well, if anybody has any feedback about what we said today, send it on in. You can use MuggleCast@gmail.com or go to MuggleCast.com and use the feedback form there. It's time now for Quizzitch.
Last week's question: which famous British actor put in 2 weeks' notice and quit a role they had been cast in for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets?
Ooh.
I have no clue. Never heard about this before.
Really?
I gave you a clue in the question. 2 weeks' notice is actually the movie that they then went off to do.
Oh, really?
With, I think, Julia Roberts. It's Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant.
Hugh
was cast as Gilderoy Lockhart and left production.
Oh, he would have been great.
He actually, he would have been great. But if you want to see kind of a Lockhart-esque role, look no further than Paddington 2.
Oh god, he's so good in that.
Produced by Harry Potter producer David Heyman.
Yeah.
Well, and also starring Brendan Gleeson.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Harry Potter actors in it too, like Imelda Staunton as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
so
Slughorn's in there too.
Oh yeah.
So it was listed as scheduling conflicts, but anyway, correct answers were submitted by 5 people: Lance Dansport, Voldemort, Count Ravioli, William Walton, and Jason King. Congratulations, everybody. Next week's question: who invented the spell Muffliato?
Okay.
Sounds like a great sandwich.
Come on down.
Does it use a muffin?
PLB.
Eric, the pizza wizard.
Oh, yes.
Submit your answers by tweeting us with the hashtag Quizzage. I'm really excited about next week's discussion because, Laura, we are going to be discussing the biggest plot holes in Harry Potter.
Yes, and there are plenty of them to dive into, Andrew.
Oh, yes, Laura. Yes. There's been a lot of discussion about this topic over the years online, but we've never really done this before. So I think this will be a fun way to criticize the series that we love so much. We criticize because we care.
Never do that ever
Yeah.
on the show.
I think it is really important to be critical of literature that you love.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to take all these too seriously. We're just going to have fun with it.
Yeah.
Oh,
we'll try not to spend too much time on time turners.
Yeah, I was going to say, is the whole next episode talking more Cursed Child?
I think we should focus on the 7 books primarily.
Well, I'm just saying Cursed Child is a big plot hole in and of itself. But anyway, no, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, and if anybody has any big plot holes that have really bugged them, please email them in. Again, MuggleCast@gmail.com or the contact form or our voicemail line, which is 19203-MUGGLE. And speaking of voicemails, we received this chicken soup from one of our listeners, Hildy.
Hey, MuggleCast. My name is Hildy, and I'm almost 14 years old and an 8th grader. I'm an avid Harry Potter fan and have been since I first discovered the series back in kindergarten. My cousins Maya and Willa and I love talking about the series and coming up with cool theories. I discovered your podcast when I was about 11, while looking for some new parts of the fandom to explore. If I'm being entirely honest, I haven't always kept up with the episodes, but recently I've been listening every night while getting ready for bed. I love listening to you guys theorize and share different opinions and perspectives on the series. One of my favorite parts of the show is chapter by chapter, and even though you're sadly finished going through all of the books, I will definitely be going back to listen to the older ones. I just wanted to say thank you for all that you do. Whenever I am stressed or need a distraction, I can always rely on you guys to cheer me up. So thank you again for creating a truly awesome podcast and for still being able to talk about things after 15 years. P.S. This is a theory of mine from one of your episodes a few years back that I have always wanted to share. I don't know if you guys have talked about this one of your episodes. You probably have, because then again, I've definitely missed a few of your episodes. No offense. My theory is that Voldemort cannot feel love because he was not made with real life. As you know, Merope, I think that's how you say it, Gaunt used a love potion or spell to get Tom Riddle Sr. to be with her. That is why I think Voldemort cannot feel love, because he was not made with real love. He was made with a love potion. Let me know what you think about this theory, and thank you again for all that you do. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Hildy. That was very sweet.
Yeah, and also spot on. I think we addressed that earlier in this episode, that this was confirmed. That, Tom Riddle's various detachment disorders are likely stemming from his creation due to a love potion.
So thank you again for that. We would also love everybody's support on Patreon. Patreon.com/MuggleCast is where you can support us. It is the reason why we are a weekly show, and we're having so much fun. We're having a great time, aren't we, guys, doing all these discussions post chapter by chapter. We're talking about all kinds of things week to week. It's been very refreshing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And we have some fun stuff coming up in the weeks ahead. I'm really excited for.
We actually posted a preview of what's coming up in the weeks ahead on our Patreon a couple weeks ago. So check that out if you haven't already. And we'll try to do that from time to time. But we also have other benefits like access to our recording studio and early access to each completed episode of MuggleCast. Also ad-free MuggleCast. Plus, if you pledge at the $5 level or higher, you will get the annual physical gift. And if you pledge at the Slug Club level, which is the highest level, you will have the chance to co-host MuggleCast one day, just like Shyam did. Shyam, thanks so much for joining us today. You did great. It was awesome having you.
It was really great to be on.
We also have the bonus MuggleCast benefit, and today we're doing something kind of unique. So after we record this episode, we are going to record a trailer for MuggleCast, so new listeners can get a short preview of MuggleCast. And for bonus MuggleCast this week, we're just going to record us attempting to record the trailer, and we're going to give our patrons the unedited version of that. I think it'll be fun and interesting to listen to, and we're going to be screwing up and reworking things, so it'll be interesting. So that bonus MuggleCast will be available this week. Also, please do follow us on social media. We are MuggleCast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I think that does it for this week's episode. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm Andrew.
I'm Eric.
Micah.
I'm Laura.
And I'm Shyam.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.